Christ. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire.' But Abraham replied, 'Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us.' He answered, 'Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment.' Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them.' 'No, Father Abraham,' he said, 'but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent.' He said to him, 'If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.'" This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. In the name of God, of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. Well, this is a challenging gospel lesson, isn't it? It kind of makes you feel a little uncomfortable in lots of different ways. But it's helpful maybe if we start with a question, and that is, how do you know how big or valuable something is? So if we said, here's $1,000. Is $1,000 a lot of money? Yeah, not bad, eh? If you're going to buy a candy bar and you got $1,000, that'll probably do the job, hey? But if I said, here's your $1,000 and you've got to pay for your grandkids' education, well, that's not so good, right? It depends on what it is that you're going to buy. What about time? So if I said an hour, is that a long time? Well, all right. So if I was going to tell you, so you could fly out of West Palm Beach and get to L.A. in an hour, that'd be pretty quick, wouldn't you think? But if I said this sermon is going to last an hour, pretty quick, right? So it depends on the thing, and you can only find out whether something is valuable or weighty by looking at the end, what the use, what the purpose is for the thing, and then you know whether it's valuable or big or not. And the same thing is true about a human life, right? About a human life. And so Jesus, in this gospel lesson, takes us to the end of life, to the end of 2 people's lives, a very rich man and a very poor man. And he asks us to look at the quality of their life, what their lives were about, and to be able to weigh that in our own minds as we look at our lives. And so with that, we can kind of move into the gospel lesson, but there are just a couple things I need to point out. One is, in their culture, during the time that Jesus was preaching, there was a sense that if you were sick, if you were blind, or if you were lame, it was because you were cursed of God. You'd done something that was wrong. And so God was meeting that crisis, that curse out on you. And likewise, if you were wealthy, you were blessed of God. So there were things about you that God had just chosen you and poured out his blessing on you. And so there was this sense, this is not a capitalistic society in which we raise ourselves by our own bootstraps and build a business and become, overnight internet millionaires. This is the sense that people come from families, inherit wealth, and all of a sudden you're very wealthy, and it's because God has blessed you in that way. And so with that mindset, we come into the gospel lesson for this morning. Jesus says there are two guys. One is tremendously wealthy. It's imaginably as wealthy as you can imagine. So he says, there's a rich man who's dressed in purple. Purple, so to dye cloth was an expensive process. Dyes were not, you couldn't normally find them in the marketplace, and so you had to have a lot of money to be able to procure them. Fine linen, it says. This is probably imported linen. And so this guy, the way he dresses is ostentatious. And he lives in luxury every day, it says. So that's his lifestyle, his regular way of being able to function. And at his gate, so he's a gate, probably a palace that's there. So at his gate, there is a beggar, and his name is Lazarus. Now that's significant. What's the name of the rich guy? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know because it's almost like he has no identity. There's no one there. It's like a mist. It's like emptiness. There's no identity there. But the poor guy, what's his name? Lazarus. And Lazarus, the name Lazarus means God is my helper. So who is this guy's helper? God. God alone. God is the one who's there. But God, if you got to have somebody on your side, God's the guy, right? And so God is this guy's helper, not the rich guy. Lazarus is covered with sores. So he's being tormented by his physical condition and longing to eat the food that fell from the rich man's table. The word there is the bread. So they didn't use napkins during that time, and they didn't use forks and spoons. And so people ate with their hands, and wealthy people ate with their hands, and then after supper was done, you didn't want to wipe your hands on your fine purple linen, so they had bread. And so the bread would be given to them, and they would wipe their hands on the bread. And that was the food that was thrown out for the beggars that were in the street. And so that was the food that Lazarus himself is looking forward to being able to receive. It says that even the dogs came and licked his sores. We think of dogs as being cute. They're pets. They're members of the family. We love them. That's not these dogs. These dogs are street dogs. They're scurrilous. They have diseases, and so it says something about the weakened condition of Lazarus, that he can't even fight off these dogs. They come and they lick his sores. They take advantage of his condition. Can we all just say gross? Ugly. So it's ugly. So this is a man who is in torment in this place, and then so finally, now this is the point. So finally, the time comes, the end of life comes, and they both die. Now, who's the success here? So now, and as the people who are Jesus is teaching, they're thinking, well, so the rich guy is going to go on he's got bigger palaces. Father Abraham's going to continue to bless him. And the poor guy, he's been cursed, and so he's going to continue to be cursed. Well, that's not how Jesus handles this story. It's completely flipped. And so now it's Lazarus who's comforted. He's the one, he gets to sit right next to Abraham, Father Abraham. He's the blessed one. He's healed. And all of a sudden he's in community. People are caring for him. And where's the rich guy? He's the one who now is in torment. And so he's waking up to his condition. And this guy who has no name is recognizing how tormented he is. And so what does he do in the midst of his torment? He does what he always does. He tells his staff to take care of the problem, right? So he calls over to Lazarus. Tell Lazarus to go and get some water for me to kind of slake my thirst. And all of a sudden Abraham explains to him, well, we got this problem because the architecture of heaven and hell, it doesn't work that way. You can't just kind of go from one to the other, so that's not going to happen. And so just a point. So the point of this story is not to describe what heaven and hell are really like, right? This is not drawing a picture of the architecture of heaven and hell, but Jesus is telling the story to be able to make the point. And so he's tormented, the rich man is tormented, and he says, well, if he can't do that, send him to my brothers. I've got 5 brothers, and warn them so that they won't come to this place. Now, again, Lazarus is the messenger boy, that's going to go on the bidding of the rich guy. And Abraham says, no. We've already sent somebody, and they already have Moses and the prophets. And somehow you missed the point. But they got Moses and the prophets, and the rich guy says, no, they're not going to listen to them. They're not going to listen to them. So if somebody comes from the dead, then they'll listen to him. And Abraham says, well, even if somebody comes from the dead, they won't listen to them. They've got Moses and the prophets. If they won't listen to them, they won't listen to somebody who even rises from the dead. And that's significant, isn't it? Because this is Jesus who's telling the story, one who rises from the dead and yet would not be heard by them. So it's the Moses and the prophets that they've got who bring the message. So that's the key. That's the key. So what is it that this rich man should have gotten and that his brothers should get that they haven't up until this point gotten? Well, we can ask ourselves the question. So Moses and the prophets, so Moses, the giver of the law, so he brought the law to the instructions of God, to the people of God. And if we were to summarize the teaching of the law, what would that be? So the summary of the law is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's what Jesus said to the rich young ruler. So what then did the rich man do that was so wrong? Nothing. Nothing. He did nothing. He did nothing. He had this guy who was sitting there at the side of his house, and he looked completely past him, didn't even see him. Didn't give him anything except for the bread that he'd wiped his hands on from a meal. He did nothing to help. You remember this story of the attorney, the lawyer who comes and inquires about Jesus, and Jesus summarizes the law, and he says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And the teacher of the law says, well then, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, well, and he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. This is a guy who unexpectedly is a Samaritan, who unexpectedly stumbles on this man who's been beaten on the side of the road, and what does he do? Does he just walk on by? No. He stops, he dresses his wounds, he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to an inn, he takes money out of his pocket, he pays for the guy to be able to stay there, and he says, I'll come back and check on him. That's the one who treats him like a neighbor. What does this guy do? Nothing. He don't even have to put him on a donkey, for crying out loud. But he does nothing. There is no movement of compassion on the part of this man. His heart is stony and cold. He is so surrounded by his own greed and self-sufficiency. He doesn't even see the need for the movement of love towards God or towards the people who are around him. So people might have said, and we might say, I thought it was about money. It's because the guy's rich. That's the problem. And, you've heard the expression, money is the root of all evil. I mean, where did that come from? It doesn't come from the Bible. The passage, in fact, that is famous for that is in our epistle lesson for this morning. So take your leaflet and go with me. Find verse 10 in 1 Timothy. Verse 10, it says, 1 Timothy, verse 10, it says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But you, man of God, flee all of this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. So that's a great little trivia piece if you're having dinner with somebody and say, where does that expression, that money is the root of all evil come from? It doesn't come from the Bible. We make it up out of our own heads. It is the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evil. This passage isn't about how much you've got. This passage is about what you love, where your heart goes. And what you do then is determined by the things that we love and how we steward the resources that we've got. I love being at St. Mary's, and our mission statement here at St. Mary's is growing into Jesus, reaching out in love. That sounds so good, it's like music. Let's say it again. Growing into Jesus, reaching out in love. It is that sense of growing into Jesus, understanding him more and more and more and more, knowing him more and more and more, and then letting that translate into our relationships with the people around us, so that we can reach out with compassion and touch one another and see our families and see the friends that we have to be healed and nourished and lifted up, so that we become vehicles of his grace. And then we steward all of the things that we have. Greed is an equal opportunity destroyer. It destroys rich people and poor people. It destroys everybody alike. But to be able to give ourselves to a life of love, then however much we've got, then that love translates itself into the way that we use the resources that God gives to us. Up in Asheville, North Carolina, there's a nursing home that was added on to a hospital, 78 beds. And in that nursing home, there was a guy by the name of Jack who volunteered. I just heard this story just this past week. He volunteered. He was in his 80s, and he showed up virtually every day, as often as he could. And he just kind of gave himself to volunteering with the residents who were there. So he did what he could he'd run errands for them. He would grab a bucket and mop the floors if that was needed. He would help change bedpans if that was needed. He would do whatever it was that was able to be helpful. But he helped to shape the culture of that place, and to put a stamp of compassion and servanthood and gratitude in a place that could be pretty dark at times. So at one point, eventually, he died. He died at the age of 91. And so people who were in the nursing home were just grateful for him, for Jack. He made such a difference for them. And so people wanted to go to his funeral. And when they went to his funeral, they found out that he was Jack Eckert, who was the founder of Eckert Drugstores. His estate was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, he had given the money to build the convalescent home that was attached to that hospital that he was volunteering in, but nobody ever knew it because for them he was just Jack. So he had this sense of being able to give himself. He had spent millions of dollars he'd given away in projects for philanthropy. He had a heart for kids. He did all kinds of other kinds of philanthropic projects, but he put his body and soul into it, serving the people who are around him, and that's what gave him a sense of purpose in his life. It is a really good thing that Jesus comes to us, because he brings to us freedom from the things that would numb our hearts and keep us from being blessed in a world where we've got so much, but it's so easy to just let it go through our fingers without having been used or put to a significant purpose. The opportunity to be God's people, to be able to see God use us, to be touched by him, and to let his love translate itself into how it is that we live our lives. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God for his gift. Amen.